Добрый день, Центральная Азия, Кавказ.
Good afternoon, Central Asia, Caucasus, and entire world. And I'm Gripova. Would like to welcome you, 22,000 viewers, to the second global festival. And today is the topic of education, its development with the world experts in education, to discuss the future of the schools and how the system of education can change. Today with us we have Artur Van Diesel, John Coles, Eric Lohr, Diana Tsoi, and our honorable guest, Robert Jenkins.
Hello, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome indeed, both to everybody here in the studio and also all of you who are online and listening in. I gather it's quite a large crowd listening to this, and I think it's excellent that we have this technology at our disposal to be able to do an event like this with so many people at the same time during this difficult time of the pandemic. So fantastic work from Nobel Fest to host this session, which is basically looking at what the key challenges are for the schools of the future, what children should learn today for a successful tomorrow. And we are going to hear some very interesting interventions and views from both the panelists here with me in the studio, as well as those panelists who are online. Just to introduce the panelists to you, we're going to hear from Robert Jenkins, who's actually also going to share a video introduction with us. Robert Jenkins joined UNICEF in 1995 and has over 20 years of experience in international development and humanitarian programming. He has worked in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and many, many other places too. He's got a huge experience, and basically his background is very much with that international engagement. We're also going to hear from Artur Van Diesel, who is with me here in the studio. Arthur is UNICEF rep in Kazakhstan. He's been here, I believe, since 2019. He previously served with UNICEF as regional social policy advisor in the Middle East and North Africa. He too has worked in many places around the world, including, I think more recently in Tajikistan, but he has also worked in Africa, South and Central Asia, the Middle East, and he has over 25 years of experience in social policy, applied social research, monitoring and evaluation, and program management. Also with me in the studio is John Coles, who is headmaster at LAWRIE Astana. I believe he was also previously LAWRIE Almaty, and his focus is offering a world of opportunity to talented young people who wish to embrace the challenge of pursuing academic excellence. His role combines the passion for changing the future of education for the better, and I think a very important topic, safeguarding children and youth. Online with us, so we have some panelists who are online. We have Derek Wenmouth, who I believe is currently in New Zealand, so is joining us from the southern winter. Derek has a passion for e-learning and combining teaching and learning. He's the director of e-learning, and he has a fascination for the use of technology in education. Derek is a consultant and works a lot with policymakers and government agencies looking at New Zealand education policy and practice. We also have Anna Tsoi, who is a project lead for online edutainment for high school students. It's called Alpha-Rabius. She has a PhD in renewable resources and has an environmental consultancy background. As the leader of Alpha-Rabius, her mission is to raise the potential of human capital amongst Kazakh students. And in that, they are also putting together a database of employers. I think that's it. So I've introduced all the panelists to you. I hope I haven't missed anyone. So let's now go over to the video, which Robert Jenkins will share with us for his address.
Amidst a global learning crisis, which began before the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, an estimated 825 million children will not reach adulthood with the secondary level skills that they need for work and life, and over 250 million children were out of school. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated this learning crisis. 1.6 billion children have had their education disrupted, and over 800 million students still face these disruptions. Though the pandemic has disrupted learning on a scale never seen before, we now have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reimagine education and leapfrog into the future by placing technology, innovation, and digital learning at the heart of education for all children. At UNICEF, we want to put digital learning opportunities in the hands of every child and every young person. We've set an ambitious target to provide digital learning solutions to 3.5 billion children globally by 2030. The digital learning we envision will be part of a basic basket of essential services and will revolutionize learning and skill development with equity. This means a world-class education that is child-centered and skill-based, so that every child, no matter who they are or where they are, has the opportunity to develop foundational, transferable, digital, entrepreneurial, and job-specific skills they need for the future. Now is the time to work together and to build on the progress of the last decade. We must invest in education so our children are ready for school at the age of 5, ready to succeed at school at the age of 10, and ready for the transition to work. We have developed a global learning digital toolkit of world-class digital learning solutions that can be tailored to each country's individual context with the help of a wide range of actors and support. This is not a moonshot. We know it can be done. Many countries are already laying the groundwork by testing innovations at local, national, and regional level. Now it's up to all of us to work together to drive change at speed and scale. Governments lead the process and are supported with resources, expertise, and innovation from our diverse network of partners, including both the private and public sectors. Join us and our partners, including mobile network operators, content providers, device manufacturers, and innovative solution providers to connect every child and every young person to digital learning under UNICEF's Reimagine Education initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very clear message from Jenkins. That's excellent. So just before we start the panel discussion, let me just introduce myself. My name is Eric LAWRIE. I'm director of the British Council in Kazakhstan, and our remit is to basically add an international dimension to learning and teaching. We basically believe that internationalizing education opens minds to a broader range of views and perspectives. And I firmly believe that when students hear, feel, and touch a diverse range of views and opinions, they will be better thinkers, better leaders, better informed, and more able to challenge convincingly. I think also something the British Council quite firmly believes in is that ideas need to aerate rather than be boxed in and insular. It's better to make an idea, a program, a curriculum, a syllabus, an education goal, which can stand up to challenge rather than fall down at the first hurdle. So let's start now with the questions. And it is for the panelists to answer them as and when they wish. There's no particular order to this. It's just that if you feel the urge to answer the question, please do so. So the first question is this. How can schools prepare children for jobs that don't exist yet? Who would like to go first?
I'll go first on that one. I think the key thing is you've got to prepare them to be creative solution solvers. So actually you're giving them a toolkit, because if you think about when we were at school, we learned certain subjects, and here we are now, we're having a conference or a telecom call where many of our audience are not physically present. We've got speakers from New Zealand joining us. All this technology didn't exist. And yet we've had to learn that. And those children who are going to go on to skills, we don't even know what they've got, or subject knowledge, has got to be able to look and evaluate. So it's all about skill setting. It's not teaching them rote learning, which I think used to be very traditional. You had to learn dates and figures and facts. It's about providing them the skills to take in new information. The teacher acts as a guide, and they then put them together and work through different solutions. And that's, I think, how modern education needs to change, just because we don't know what they're going to need.
Arthur, I think you wanted to come in there.
Yes, I'd love to add some thoughts to what John just has said, and I fully agree with him. First of all, the world is changing so rapidly. We have so much technological change, and change on all levels, really, that indeed, we don't know the future that the children of today are going to face. And that is true for the labor market, the jobs they're going to do in the future, but it's also true for their role as citizens, their role as parents, their role as members of the society that we will build together. So what are the kind of skills that we need to equip young children and young adults with today? John already started opening that subject. At UNICEF, we see 4 categories of skills that are absolutely critical. First, of course, the old basics stay important, the foundational skills. So here we're talking about reading, writing, arithmetic. These absolutely stay fundamental. We're adding to that digital skills. So your ability to find information, your ability to discern what is right information and what may be myths or rumors. Your ability also to collaborate, to create online. All these skills are new digital skills. So that's the second category. Third category, and of course, this is also something that the education system has worked on already, is that of job-specific skills. So here we're talking vocational and technical skills. But the fourth category, and I think that's the category that John was referring to already, is what we would call transferable skills, or some people call them life skills, or they've also been called 21st century skills. So here we're talking about your ability to solve problems, your ability to collaborate, your skills when it comes to managing your emotions, managing your relations with others, empathy. All these things are absolutely critical now. And actually, when we talk to employers in Kazakhstan, this is a refrain we're hearing from them. When young adults come into the labor force, essentially we have to re-educate them, because that whole area of transferable skills is what is lacking, essentially. Now, that needs a lot of attention, but also the basics should not be forgotten. If you look at the foundational skills, actually, Kazakhstan is not doing as well as it should. Famously, a little while ago, the World Bank actually put out some information that indicated that 60% of young learners in Kazakhstan are functionally illiterate. Yes, they can read and write. Yes, they can maybe list the capitals of the world or cite important dates in the history of the country. But applying these basic skills to day-to-day life is a whole different challenge. So we need to strengthen the foundational skills, but also add those areas of digital skills and, importantly, transferable skills to the mix as well.
Thank you very much, Arthur. So we've heard from John and Arthur here in the studio. I can't see if our panelists online are signaling if they want to make a comment. Yes, Derek, please.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'll add really in support of what's been said, but probably to give real emphasis to that combination of the foundational skills and the transferable skills. And just to highlight, in New Zealand for almost 20 years now, we've had a curriculum that has placed at the front of the curriculum 5 competencies, which are those transferable skills. We have thinking, the ability to relate to others, using language, symbols, text, managing self, and participating and contributing are the headings for that. But just really want to reinforce that the rationale for that has come through the same sort of thing that was raised by Arthur just then, the response from employers and people who deal with their students when they're leaving school to say, look, a lot of the stuff that you have been doing, which you believe is preparing them with skills for work, just isn't necessary because we're having to retrain them anyway. The workplace is changing so quickly that actually the workplace is the most appropriate place to learn those skills for work. But what we aren't getting are the people who can manage themselves, who turn up on time, who know how to cope with pressure and crises, who can collaborate with others, because most of what we do is in teams and that sort of thing. So really strong proponent to support that idea of those transferable skills.
Thank you very much. And I think an absolute endorsement of what we've just heard here in the studio as well. Diana, do you want to come in on anything there?
Yep. Thank you for those marvelous comments. From my side, as I work for Astana International Financial Center, and this educational project is funded by this financial center. Why we do this? Because we also believe that employers themselves should step in to the educational market and offer the solutions to the young generation. Because I absolutely agree with Arthur that this transferable skills, the applicability of the knowledge young generation gets in the educational institution is of the essence. And that's why us as a representative of the employers of business, we come in and we unite the network of business professionals we have within AFC, and we create, that's why we call it edutainment content. We create a content which will show in entertainment way to high school students of how the knowledge which they get at schools and unis can be applied in real life, and why is it important not to take many knowledge at face value, but be able to adapt and continuously develop throughout their lives.
Thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us. I'm now actually going to move on to another question, which is around teachers and the role of teachers for the future. So my question to the panelists is, how will the role of teachers change, if at all, in the next decade or more?
Can I go first on that one? I mean, being a current teacher, that's one thing I've always been teaching, and I've been teaching now for 24 years. I know how the role of teaching has changed already. When I started teaching, the teacher was the fountain of knowledge. If a pupil had a question, probably the only person in the room who knew the answer was going to be the teacher. Now, in a modern day classroom, many students, and I appreciate not every student, will have access to a device which has the world's greatest encyclopedia. So rather than a teacher just being a giver of knowledge, you have to be a guide. So yes, the teacher obviously has the academic background and you must know your subject area, but it's more about getting them to understand the data sources they're looking at and how to interpret it. And that, I believe, is the role of a modern day teacher. They can all find out facts and figures like that. You as a teacher are, okay, but is it right? How do you process it? So it's more of a guidance rather than the fact giver.
Great, thank you, thank you. Please, Arthur.
Adding to what John has said, I totally agree. Teacher should be a guide, a facilitator almost. And we have a chance to actually fundamentally rethink the education model, right? And that's what my colleague and good friend, Robert Jenkins, referred to in the video. We need to reimagine education because it is possible and because it is necessary. So we need to move away from that 20th century model where learning consisted of putting children in a room, putting a teacher in front of them, keeping there for a number of hours a day, and having a very unidirectional, teacher-centered approach to learning. What we want to see is an approach that is much more centered on the learner. The learner with all their abilities and challenges as well, to have a much more individualized approach to learning, and also to make that learning process lifelong, because that's also what the world of today requires of us. I think that's going to be the answer to the future of education. It needs to also be a system that recognizes multiple pathways to learning. So there isn't one way of learning. And actually, the COVID crisis and the rapid transition we had to make to remote education will prompt us, I think, to rethink. It would be a mistake, I think, to think that one day COVID will be over and all children will return to school and education will be as it was before. We should actually accept that blended learning through multiple pathways, is actually a gift and an opportunity to reimagine the education system and making it much more learner-centered, making it much more diverse and much more inclusive as well, because there are certain children who face particular challenges on their education journey. This approach actually makes it much easier to cater for these individual needs of individual children.
Thank you very much, Arthur. Can I come to our two panelists online? Anything from Derek or Diana you want to share? Diana, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add a short comment of the importance of mentorship. Within my experience, Kazakhstan children who are receiving additional mentorship from like extra mentorship from business professionals are showing like tremendous results. Like under my personal lead, high school girls within the One International project got international recognition in the competitions and further development. So what I think that teachers at schools are also should be supplemented, or some additional mentorship should be provided in line with them.
Thank you very much, Diana. And Derek, can I come to you?
Yeah, 2 points that stand out for me. I think one is defining the role of teacher. When we use words like facilitator or mentor or guide, all of which are very valid terms, we have to be mindful that we're not simply substituting those for that unidirectional thing that you talked about for teacher, that there's a delivery here and that we're targeting the individual. So I think there's some subtlety in what we mean by those words. I like to use the concept of the teacher has become and needs to become the experienced learner. In other words, they are immersed in this as well as learners. They have to be open and developing those same transferable skills that we're talking about for students. The thing about the teacher is that they have a lot more experience in most areas than the people are talking about. And so that experience is what they bring to the fore in the design of the learning and the times that they see it right to pass on knowledge, the times when they see it as right to stand back and allow the students to develop those skills. Second point I just want to really quickly make is around the idea of digital skills. We've talked a little bit about, and as a panel, heard that digital skills mean about being able to create and share and understand content, to be able to access it and determine whether it's true. But actually, those are the fundamental things, I think. But I think there's a whole world of digital literacy beyond simply that level, which is actually takes us off in the direction of understanding deeply how the technology works and becoming equipped and able to work with the technology in ways that we might have thought about a mechanic works with the car. So the emphasis on developing digital skills to do with coding and so forth becomes, I think, not just an option, but an important part to understand how it is that the technology we are engaging with is working and influencing our lives, which then impacts the other part of that is there's a huge demand and need for understanding both the positive and negative influences and forces of technology in society, everything from how it's impacting our physical and mental well-being through to the way that it's impacting on the way that we form relationships and puts our personal safety at risk at times as well. So it's a pretty broad area that I'd want to make sure is mentioned here.
Thank you very much for that, Derek. So I'm going to just swap it around a little bit. I'm going to now, for my next question, which is from the online audience. So I've got some live questions coming up here. And what I'll do is for this first question from the audience, if I could give it to Derek and Diana to answer, and then we'll come back into the studio. And I think this is a really good question. So it's quite long, but let me read it out. So this is online. Kazakhstan, like a lot of countries, suffers from brain drain, where talented students go abroad to study and work. What can we do to encourage these students to stay in Kazakhstan? Can I come over to perhaps Derek and Diana, please, for any comments?
Would you like to start, Diana?
Yep. I'll comment on what we are doing already, and probably my colleagues can comment on, advise what we can improve. So our idea is to create the ecosystem where those talents can develop here in Kazakhstan. So that's why government invests into infrastructural projects, international investments are being attracted. And so the talented young professionals can join the teams and grow here. And also within AAFC particularly, we have lots of young professionals who came back from the US companies from Europe and join our team, because in here we operate on the basis of on international standards, so that they have enough challenging assignments and enough opportunities to grow as professionals. So I think the main thing is in Kazakh people themselves to create the sphere, the area where they can develop. And I pass the word to Derek of how.
I think you've captured the thought there about creating the ecosystem that makes it desirable to live and stay and work in the country. So in New Zealand, we've got a reputation for being a very well-travelled people. It's like a rite of passage for New Zealanders to go off and do an overseas experience and come back here, hopefully. And we've experienced a brain drain from New Zealand, quite a significant one over the last decade or so. Interestingly, COVID came and many tens of thousands of people came back to New Zealand right at the start of that. And we're now talking about this huge talent that sits in the country. But I think when you just get down to the grassroots of things, the appeal of staying somewhere is the amount of support and like-minded people that you have. That's a part of the ecosystem. The quality of life, if you're particularly thinking about raising a family and so forth. So in New Zealand, it's appealing for people to be able to live here because it's close to the sea, there's skiing, there's all sorts of outdoor pursuits that you can do during the year. But one of the things that becomes critical in our experience is just simply thinking about, what am I going to be paid for this work? And New Zealand, being a small country with a limited amount of money in the pot to be able to pay people, is finding that that's one of the major reasons that people are just scooting overseas. Young people can earn 3, 4, 5, 6 times the amount of money that they would earn in New Zealand for doing a very similar job, and get the scope of support for developing their careers even further than they may here. So it is a problem for small countries to address. But I do believe that working virtually and understanding the power of that can at least salvage that for some people.
Thanks very much for that, Derek. And back here in the studio, John or Arthur, any views on brain drain and talent disappearing overseas?
Well, maybe a quick comment from my side. Kazakhstan, of course, has had a huge experiment in the form of the Bolashak program, which many of the viewers online will be very familiar with, essentially where young people are sponsored to do their tertiary education abroad, and then there is a requirement for them to come back to Kazakhstan and work a number of years in Kazakhstan. Now, that kind of incentive, that short-term incentive, the rule that you have to come back and work, in itself is not enough, because I think still many of these young people, when they've done their mandatory years back in Kazakhstan, they still go abroad. Many of them end up in international agencies. So really want to support what Diana said in terms of building, let's call it the ecosystem, and linking to what Derek said, really understanding of what it is people look for in terms of a fulfilling life, right? Because yes, it is about a salary, but it's also about quality health and education services for your children. It's also about entrepreneurial opportunities. So that approach to human development has to be a very comprehensive one, and it has to include all these different facets, opportunities for people to really realize themselves in that context. But also, let's not forget that the world is changing at such a rapid pace, and where you are matters less and less, right? So we're increasingly living in a digital world. So even if people move abroad, it is very easy for them to stay engaged at home as well. And I think working with the diaspora and ultimately encouraging people to re-engage in Kazakhstan is also an area that needs to be further explored.
Thank you very much for that, Arthur. And John, any?
Yeah, I think it's very similar in a way. I think to go back to Diana's point, it's about the government and entrepreneurs actually providing the opportunities. And one which actually we're currently in a TV studio in the Expo building in Nur-Sultan, and very, very nearby to us is an organization called the Istana Hub. And if you're unaware of the Istana Hub, what it actually allows you to do is develop your entrepreneurial skills. And it's a bit like being modeled on Google and Apple. So we were visiting that a few weeks ago, and you have got entrepreneurs and they guide them. And a lot of new companies have come from this Istana Hub. And it's providing them with the infrastructure, the building space, the technology, the expertise. They're not telling people how to do this, they're just providing. Now, the other thing is obviously, why we have brain drain. And when we talk about brain drain, we could be talking about universities, students going at 18 to Kazakhstan, or going later for jobs. So I think twofold is one, and there's some very good universities in Kazakhstan, again, investing in education and in the universities, and then providing those very able graduates with the opportunities to come about and develop their own companies. And after going back to what you were saying, being located in a country now is so, well, almost irrelevant at times, because we know there are now global companies, and entrepreneurs from Kazakhstan are setting up apps and Derek, this goes back to your point, particularly with the Istana Hub regarding coding and app development. You don't have to be located in America now to write yourself a multi-billion-pound app. And that, therefore, provides the opportunity for the students of Kazakhstan to stay in Kazakhstan, where the culture is very important to them. I mean, the one thing I've noticed living in Kazakhstan for 3 years is the speed at which things change in Kazakhstan. The Kazakhstan pupils want change and they want the opportunities. So if you can provide them with the various facilities, you don't have to train them. They are very able to learn themselves. And that's the key thing to stopping a brain drain.
Thank you very much for that. The next question from the online audience, I think, is a really interesting one. And it's about whether or not we can ensure education is a level playing field, i.e., can students who are from perhaps lower income or lower ranked schools or lesser known universities, can they actually compete fairly with students who've come out of, the top tier schools and the top notch universities? So my question to all of you is, how can we encourage or make sure that there is a level playing field in education, where no matter what your background is or your income or where you're from, you can compete equally for jobs, for internships, and progress with your education? So who would like to go first? Derek, please.
Thank you. I'd like to make a comment, because this is probably one of our number one political issues in New Zealand at the moment. And I think there are two things come to my mind here. One is you have to have a fundamental belief that actually that equality of outcome is what you want and then are prepared to be committed to. And this links to our earlier conversation about the jobs of the future, because our current economic models globally, the very premise of our economic model requires there to be a lot of people in our economy who are low wage people, who are the servants to the sorts of industries that support the wealthier people. And our education, to a large degree, for many years has reflected that. So if we really believe in and are committed to the idea of equality of outcomes, we have to then commit to equity in inputs. And we have to be prepared to say that for those people who are disadvantaged and who, for various reasons, don't have the same opportunity to be on a level playing field with others, that we as a society, as a government, as a community, are prepared to see more given to them to enable them to take advantage of those opportunities. I think there's a real tension there, and it's something that I think often gets ignored in the rhetoric here. And so our solutions only go sort of half pie, or they just put a Band-Aid on the problem. That would be how I see it.
Thank you very much, Derek. Over to you, Arthur.
Thanks so much. I'd like to add a thought to this. Now, when COVID-19 struck and we had to very rapidly go to remote education, at UNICEF, we became very concerned about the deepening of educational inequality, because, of course, suddenly it became very important whether you were connected to the internet, whether you had sufficient devices to connect to the internet, whether your particular disability still made it possible to learn remotely in a meaningful manner. So I think that has highlighted some of the things that we absolutely need to fix at rapid speed. And gratefully, government of Kazakhstan is also very focused on this. So connectivity, one. In a country like Kazakhstan, it's not an easy challenge to provide connectivity throughout this huge territory, but it's something that has to be done. Every single student needs to be connected to the internet and needs to have the devices that enable them to go onto the internet. And then the digital content needs to be accessible and meaningful for all. So actually both these priorities, UNICEF is working on very hard. We have a global project called GIGA, which is actually aiming to fix connectivity gaps throughout the world in close collaboration with governments and with the private sector. And what we're doing here specifically in Kazakhstan as well is to look at digital learning platforms and make sure that children with visual impairments, for example, are still able to access these platforms. So connectivity and inclusivity in the digital content that's being provided are two top priorities.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you. And any views, John?
Well, I mean, I was agreeing with Derek, actually. I mean, Derek said it's an issue in New Zealand, and actually within the United Kingdom, I think it's again an issue. And I don't know of any country in the world where this isn't being discussed. And talking about connectivity, that's certainly a very, very important thing. I think the other thing which you must also consider is the training you give to your teachers. I think in one positive, COVID has advanced the teaching education levels or digital literacy of many teachers, probably faster in a year than we would have seen over the last 10 years. It's forced teachers to actually learn how to give digital lessons. And again, whilst online learning is good, and there are advantages and disadvantages, I think that is a potential solution to allow students who might not have access to all the resources, the ability to actually learn and be taught by teachers who might not be able to, as in Kazakhstan, be in those remoter areas. So that is probably a positive of COVID.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Deanna, do you want to come in, or do you want me to ask the next question and you can be the first to answer it?
I'll just give the short comment. As I know, in like many countries, charities and foundations play an important role in having educational programs and making it more accessible for low-income families. And at IFC, we create a system which helps businesses to contribute to educational system through some special projects. So what I think Kazakhstan should further develop is to have those extensive CSR projects, so that not only UNICEF is contributing and caring about like connectivity access or education of like teachers all over in rural areas, but also businesses are investing within their CSR policies into that.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. I think we have time, hopefully, for another couple of questions. Very interesting one here, also from people watching online. There's a sense that children today are absolutely bombarded from all, just bombarded with information from everywhere, whether it's on social media, wherever. It's just information just being thrown at them from absolutely all directions. How can we help young people filter what's thrown at them? How can we make sure that young people are able to cope with information overload and the psychology of just constantly 24/7 being bombarded with information? Who would like to tackle that one? John.
Can I start with that one? I mean, that's something I remember I was talking to one of my students, and I said, how do you manage with all your different social medias and your channels? You have so many notifications coming in all the time. And I think children today, and when I say children, I mean teenagers and younger, have so much information. Talking about, going back to a question we had earlier, what is the role of the teacher? I think the role of the teacher, which never existed 20 years ago, is actually teaching children about mental well-being, and actually the ability to understand that if you become digitally addicted to all this information, you're going to have a problem. If you say to a child, and don't do that, they will do that. And we've seen in previous campaigns, particularly in the UK, which is actually related to various things saying, don't do this, don't do that. They don't work. So what you have to do in schools is make the student aware. The students will make their own choices. And what's interesting is when you talk to the older students, 7 to 18, they actually realize they have got information overload, and actually they want to step away. And one thing we're trying is a digital detox. were actually, and we were quite surprised, the number of 17, 18-year-olds who actually handed over their mobile device and actually, for the day, they did normal schooling, and they came back and they said to us, thank you, it was so nice not to be bombarded. They've gone through and they're probably a little bit more mature, whereas the younger ones, and then it comes on to we educating parents about the fact that if children are on devices late at night, they're not getting sleep. That's disrupting their brain pattern. That's disrupting their learning. So, and also, I think that's another aspect which schools never had to do or think about 20 years ago.
Digital detox, very interesting, John. I must talk to you further about that. Maybe we can do so after this discussion. Anyone else want to come in? Arthur, please.
Yeah, just a couple of additional thoughts. I think like with any technological advancement, we need to get used to how to deal with all the new things that are at our disposal. We at UNICEF are particularly worried, of course, about let's say the darker corners of that cyberspace, right? So there's a lot of risk of cyberbullying, for example. There's a new risks of online exploitation and abuse. What's really important is, I think, to equip children and young people with the skills to discern what is right and what is wrong, and to give them methods to actually also highlight when they feel uncomfortable and where to go for support. So that's incredibly important as well, I think.
Very valid points. Excellent. Thank you, Arthur. Deanna, were you about to say something? So I'll come to Derek. I've just seen his hand go up. Derek, please.
Thank you. Arthur kind of picked up the point I was going to make, because there are two parts to the question you asked initially. One is about the bombarding of information, and the other one is the safety issue. And I think there's an answer for both of them that I think John kind of alluded to, but it really is, we've got a problem with any attempt that we make or assumption that we make that we are in a position as a profession to assist here. And this is where we've got to understand ourselves as learners as well, because the work that I've done extensively through schools here in New Zealand and the US, one of the biggest issues is that the educators themselves feel that they don't understand this, that they are being bombarded, that they themselves don't have these skills. And so there is there's a growing need for an approach which takes into account the needs of both teachers and the students in deeply understanding and then developing the skills to engage critically and behaviours that enable themselves to be safe and stay in control, if you like. I love the detox, by the way. Fan of that sort of thing, John.
Good. So, John, we've got two people there who want to learn more about the detox, or at least to discuss it with you. Deanna, any views from you?
Well, my colleagues, I think, extensively covered everything. So
okay,
I'll just join the detox.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. I think we have a really excellent question here, and not necessarily that I completely 100% agree with it, but I think it's a very pertinent question. And the question is this. So I don't know if it's accurate or not, and I think it might be quite interesting to just hear from you as panelists how accurate you think it is. But there's a comment here that basically says that in Kazakhstan, the education system is the same as it was 100 years ago. No change. It's the same old syllabus. It's the same old format, the same old courses. It's the same old thing. And it cites Finland, for example, is transformative. Finland always looks to new ways of teaching, creating new courses, looking at teamwork, life skills, etc., etc. Any views on that comment? Anyone want to go first? Arthur, please.
I'll be the brave one and jump into that one first. I think it's a bit of an overstatement, of course, to say that nothing has changed in a century. But there is a grain of truth in the question, I think, and that's what we need to pay attention to. So are things changing at the pace they need to change? That's the question. And it also comes back again to this issue of inequalities within the education system. Kazakhstan, as I said before, is a really challenging place because we have very remote locations, people in very remote locations where you may have a school that only serves, let's say, 30, 40 pupils. How are you going to provide the same level of quality of education to those students as you do in one of the Nazarbayev intellectual schools, for example? So sorting out the inequalities, I think, is absolutely key. We work very closely with the Ministry of Education. There is a lot of thinking going into how we can modernize together the system of education. So some credit needs to go to government for that. But I think inequality remains one of the biggest challenges. And the good thing is that with the digital means that we now have at our disposal, we can actually find ways to even out the quality throughout the system.
Thank you, Arthur. Anyone else want to have a go at that question? John, please.
I think, Arthur, I agree. I think there is a grain of truth, and what you said, I agree with. I think one of the pleasures I have is I get to work with directors within with local Kazakhstan schools, and that's not just in Nur-Sultan, that is across the whole country. And increasingly with digital technology, we are able to discuss and talk about things. And I think what I find most encouraging is that those directors of those schools want the best for their students and their children, and they recognize that we work together. It's not our education system, because no education system is perfect, and if anyone says that, they're just wrong. But they recognize there are areas they can learn from around the world, and they're willing to embrace that. Now, that's coming from, yes, the government are encouraging it, but if it's coming from the directors, you're getting down to the grassroots. And then obviously they can then spread that out to the teachers. So there is a willingness to adopt new technology and new methods in teaching. So that, I think, is encouraging for Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much. Diana, yes, I can see you want to come in, and Derek.
I'd like to comment on this and say that also we are being hopeful that COVID will have at least some positive consequences, and that will be in spreading the technology in the rural areas. I totally agree and support Arthur that there is a challenge of the huge territory of Kazakhstan, and that inequality between schools in Nur-Sultan, in the center of Nur-Sultan, and in some a small village far away in the, north of Kazakhstan is huge. But I think that this blended education, technology, access to internet, to platforms, that will be a key point to change being implemented all over the country.
Thank you very much, Diana. And Derek, I think you wanted to come in as well.
I do, thank you. Because I just want to add, I think Diana's put her finger on the pulse there. It's the future, the opportunity with the blended approach and the equity issues that Arthur raised. For me, whilst we say there's a grain of truth in the question, it's a pretty huge grain in my view, because whilst we have a lot of innovative practices happening in our schools and different education systems around the world, you start to challenge the fundamental design of our schooling systems and question why it is that we constrain schooling to just 9 till 3. Or why we have timetables that block up things, why we have subjects, take all of human knowledge and still have these things called subjects, why we give teachers the responsibility for all of the tasks that they have to do, why we put students into groups based on age, and why we teach classes when we say that we're teaching an individual approach. These questions, when they are raised in international forums, are the ones that are posed where the biggest pushback. It's almost like those things have become the unchangeable parts of our system, and yet they're only part of human invention. At the end of the day, those are the things that actually shape what happens. So we might have wonderfully new computer or digital technology enhanced programs. We're trying to squeeze them into the same old structures of schools and schooling. It's the new wine and old wineskins problem.
Thank you very much, Derek, for sharing with us the large bit of grain that we have there. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Can I just check with the organisers if, because I think we're now on the hour, whether that's it or whether there's time for one more question? Time for one more question? Okay, so one final question then. And the question is on life skills or soft skills. How well is Kazakhstan doing in terms of getting students to embrace life skills and soft skills? Is it doing well or is it faltering? Who would like to go with that one?
Let me start.
Please.
Please, Diana, and then we'll come to Arthur.
Yep. So in my opinion, we are, like, again, the inequality in this area is huge. So we have the set of like Nazarbayev intellectual schools and private schools, which are like very, very good in it. But there is we kind of like go back to the previous question that not all schools are unfortunately covered yet in that. But what I think is possible to do is developing teachers because it is easier to access bigger amount, like all students through the educators. So my NAFC vector is to pay attention to teachers and develop them so then they can transmit the soft skills and additional, like as financial literacy, legal literacy, and other skills to their students.
Thank you very much, Diana. I'll come over to you now, Arthur.
Thank you. The answer, I think, in my view, is that Kazakhstan is not doing well enough when it comes to life skills. But it's not as if this is the start of the conversation. I think we've been talking about this issue for quite a few years. The problem is that there is not one approach in the country to how life skills should be integrated into the educational curriculum. So as a result, there have been many initiatives. Some specific types of schools, Diana mentioned the Nazarbayev intellectual schools, have taken it on well. Other schools have not. So I think the first thing we need to do is to actually take stock of all the initiatives we've had so far and to really chart a way forward to which the entire education system actually buys in. For us, one of the areas we're focusing on in UNICEF is also equipping adolescents with life skills. So we have a large program with the Society of Youth Workers that is actually specifically focused on young adults, adolescents who are finding their way on the labor market, equipping them with entrepreneurial skills, because of course, whatever changes we make to the education system now is not going to reach these young people who have left the education system already or are about to leave it. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anyone else want to say anything before we close? Okay, great. So can I therefore, I mean, we've gone slightly over, but I think I hope everyone has really enjoyed the conversation. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. So can I just thank Robert Jenkins for his video address, but also in particular our panelists today, John Coles, Derek Winmouth, and Arthur Van Diesen and Diana Tsoi for some fantastic interventions. I understand that this session is being recorded, so we expect there also to be an audience after this live session. So please do direct everyone to that recording once it becomes available. But can I thank you all for some fantastic thoughts and the discussion today. It's been a pleasant hosting you all, and to Nobel Fest, a brilliant initiative. Thank you very much indeed.